and welcome to another episode of The Buzzer Race. I'm your host, Nikhil Ranjan, and for our guest today, we have Michael Howard, the Boston Latin School and Advanced Mass JCL Certamen Coach. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Nikhil.
So, this is going to be pretty just throwing ourselves in here. I think the first question that I've always popped into my head when I first heard about you was, how'd you earn the nickname Cookie? Like, where did this come about?
Yeah, so it goes back to college. We're for freshman year we're doing orientation, like a name game, and I guess I was not paying attention when they went over the rules. You're going on a picnic and you're supposed to say the name of a food that starts with the same letter as your name. I thought you were just supposed to say any food. So when they got to me, I said cookies, and it just stuck from there.
Oh my God. Well, cookies are a good choice. I'm a big fan of chocolate chip cookies, so it is good to hear. So this was like your orientation in college. So you had just actually kind of finished playing, right? You had finished your 4 years. And that's kind of like the first thing I want to touch on is like, what was it like playing for Massachusetts during your years in high school, and if you played a little in middle school, when it was like a smaller state, and especially under Kevin Cox, who I think you have said before in the past actually coached you during that time.
Yeah. Kevin Cox, the legend himself, he welcomed me into the program as an eighth grader. My school team had gotten second place at the state convention that year, and so I tried out for the team, and I actually did not make it that year. But it was really important that I did go to all the practices and got the materials. I really, as a middle schooler, did not know how to approach the game and didn't really know the importance it would have for me later on. I was not the most diligent about my studies. But then, it really took until I did play one. I played my intermediate year, made the team that year, but we didn't have the greatest run at nationals, and so I didn't play again until I was a senior. And that the summer before senior year, I that that nationals I roomed with Chris Londa, who's a great mythology player and lit player from Massachusetts, and he was the captain of our team. Had a great showing at convention, and so just being around that made me really want to compete at a high level like he did. And so I started trying to study a lot more, and that's when I found I Kevin Cox had already left Mass at that time, but I found all the resources that he had provided for us. So I just all summer just started going through that all through the school year, and then finally was able to make the team senior year and had a great experience.
Yeah, no, I mean it is always interesting, right? Because like uh maybe you won't say it, but I'll say it. I think you are a pretty big coach in the scene. It's always cool to hear, that for you it wasn't necessarily, that just clicks and it happens and super stories. Like it was a hard process you had to work through. Yeah, and I think that I think those are always cool stories to hear. But here you are now coaching. You started coaching about right out of high school, I want to say, or maybe a little out of college. I forget the timeline exactly. If you
Yeah,
want to correct me on that.
as soon as and even before I graduated high school, like once I had signed out, there was a large group of seventh and eighth graders that were starting to practice at my school. So as soon as I could, I just started going back to work with them.
Yeah, and so you've been coaching for about 11 years now, I want to say. And I'm curious a bit of like, are there any specific styles that Kevin Cox had used that you kind of implemented and kind of started using? And then just kind of what kept you in coaching for 11 years? I mean, not too many people stick with the scene for, so long straight and so like motivated. So I'm just curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I think I'll answer those in reverse order. Um, the thing that kept me in coaching is really the people. I love the game. It's so fun to be a part of, whether playing, moderating, but really it's the relationships that you build along the way. Both with the students that you're coaching, with your friends that graduate and are either coaching alongside you or coaching against you, or even just moderating, being part of the whole thing. So that's what fuels me. I think that's why I've been able to stick around and do this for so long. And then as far as coaching, you know, I try to take a lot of different elements from all over. Anytime, not even just Certamen coaches that I see, successful, but I'm really interested in basketball. So basketball coaching philosophies. You know, my players will tell you that I make them do push-ups every now and then. Just any little thing to motivate is helpful. Um, Kevin Cox is really great about providing structure to our practices, as well as Sherry Housey, who coached me for a long time. And so I try to emulate a lot of things like that, having a syllabus in play, anything to really guide the students through the vast amount of material they have to cover.
Yeah, no, I mean, it is a lot. And it's interesting to hear that you're bringing things in from like other outside coaching ideas, right? Because like now I coach and I'm more or less, let's be frank, just kind of emulating what you've done and trying to think of like what looks vaguely right as something I should implement. So I mean, I think it's really interesting though. And I've heard a lot about the push-ups, but I think it's a lot of fun and it's something I definitely want to implement moving forward. So you mentioned the syllabus and you mentioned the structure, and I know y'all have used it for, this is how your NATS prep works. There's a syllabus at hand that's kind of given to guide the students in a general direction of, how should you study? What should you study? And I was curious if you can like run through what like a week of nationals practice looks like, right? Like what are the players going through, and what you kind of try to make sure happens in these weeks? Because y'all practice for about 5 weeks, I want to say. So if you could talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean it's a long, arduous process, but we try to make it as fun as possible. And that there's just so much for any one category that a player needs to learn. Got to get through all the different books and things. And so we run a 5-week syllabus, and each week for each category, there's a small breakdown. So, for instance, let's say Roman history. We pretty much follow the structure of the Heichelheim History of the Roman People book, and we use the Carey and Scullard, as well for the content. But that book's broken down into 5 units that I think work pretty well. So, we try to do 1 week dedicated to each of those units, and so within that, we'll do a few days a week where we're online, and we just do a bunch of toss-ups pertaining to the stuff in that time period or in that part of the syllabus. And then later in the week, we'll have another practice where we have the whole team together, but it's still just toss-up questions on the syllabus work. And those are intended to be, a little bit harder, things that they might see in like a semifinal or finals difficulty round. And then finally on the weekends, we all get together in person, and we do practice for a few hours at Boston University, and that's where we get to play some full rounds and get to interact and do different drills and games and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, I could only imagine how much work is being put in behind the scenes to make it happen in the first place. I've tried writing a lot of questions for syllabus myself, and that was a disaster of an experience. But I mean, once you get it done, I feel like it's a lot easier. It's just really hard the first time around.
Absolutely.
Uh, and so you mentioned that you do some practices online, and I was curious, like, is that just to like kind of make general feasibility easier? Because I know so like somewhat in the past, it has felt like it's a lot of mostly Boston Latin School students that have been making up a majority of the Massachusetts teams, but at least with this past Nats, and I'm not too confident on like the most recent previous Nats. We've also seen like Roxbury Latin students, and I think a Boston Latin Academy student or two. So I was curious, like, does that make it easier for them as well? I don't know the geography of Massachusetts super well. Like, what's kind of the logic on online practices?
Yeah, I mean, so the reason it started, we've been practicing online since about 20 2008 or so. And the reason it started was because our coach Kevin Cox moved back to Florida and was still coaching our teams during the summer. So it was really more so to give him access to us. But then over time, it just stuck as such a useful tool, because it is really people are spread out. There had been, and they're starting to be again players from different schools mixed into the team. So it's hard for everybody to meet together especially during the week. Everybody's working and doing other things. So it's so easy for us to just jump online for an hour or so and really have a short but effective practice.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think online practices work great, and I mean, definitely relate. It makes it much easier for accessibility on a lot of ends. So we were talking about, newer players from other schools also getting mixed into the rosters once more. And Massachusetts has been pretty fortunate to field pretty large rosters at recent Nats. And I'm curious, what goes into thinking about your lineups that you put through in prelims and how you end up choosing playoffs, right? Because especially playoffs, they're one rounds. How do you kind of put that all together? So I'm curious, how do you work through that as a coach?
I will tell you, it is so difficult because there's so many talented students to work so hard for all year each year, and it's always a challenging decision trying to figure out who gets to play at all, who's going to get to play multiple rounds and things. And it's I still have not gotten it down to a science, but I think the most important thing is to have open communication with your players and let them know like this is what you're doing well. This is what we want to see you try to improve a little bit. And then there's a lot of data. The fact that we do these practices online, and even at the in-person ones, and we can keep a lot of different stats for how things are going. So then it makes that conversation a little bit easier, and people understand where you're coming from. But even still, the numbers don't tell everything, and you kind of have to go with the feel of the team, and it's all about building the right community. You want your players to get along and not feel like it's a competition, even if folks study the same subject. Don't want it to feel like it's a direct head-to-head competition for a myth spot.
Mhm.
Whereas more, we want it to be more organic. Like, okay, these players play well together. This group seems to generate the most points in tougher rounds. And so usually it comes together pretty well, and it's pretty well received by the team.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that process is good. And I mean, it's about the best you can do, right? I mean, there's really not much else you can kind of do at the end of the day. You're not afforded 10 opportunities to try it, right? So, I mean, I totally get it. I can only imagine how hard of a process it might be. And so the kind of the last thing I want to touch on about is this recent Nats. What are your thoughts about how the teams ended up doing for Massachusetts, and I guess specifically Advanced, who you worked so closely with? What were your thoughts on it? I was just curious to hear that.
Yeah, no, I thought all of our teams were spectacular. Uh, we had three teams qualify for the finals, which is just a really impressive feat. And I think Florida also had that accomplishment. So shout out to them and their coaches. As far as we had a novice group that was pretty evenly divided among the two different schools, Boston Latin and Roxbury Latin. And so the way that group came together as a cohesive unit, and withstood some pretty grueling rounds was just really impressive. And then the intermediate team, again was a very talented team, and brought in a student from Duxbury High School who competed and won with that group last year. And so the fact that they were right there, and came down to the last question for them, that thought that was spectacular. And then there was the advanced group that I got to work with much more closely all summer. And going into the year, I knew that we were going to be a very young team, in the sense that we didn't have any seniors that were going to be playing at nationals. And so it was a year of really just like learning how to play, learning how to be successful, how to win, and how to work together. And then again, once we got into the summer, adding in a couple other students from Roxbury Latin, and really just building that cohesive unit. And this was a year where I thought it was a ridiculously talented field, a lot of talented seniors and juniors out there who had experience and played well against us all year. So the fact that we withstood pretty much every storm that we could, and ended up within 40 or 50 points
Yeah.
of first place at the end. Couldn't have asked for much better there.
Yeah, no, I mean they were spectacular results, and I mean, yeah, every team just killed it. So it was really nice to see. But beyond just coaching, you have also done a lot of like work to try giving resources for other programs and building them up. And so you served on a panel, I believe, at one point, and then you also introduced the Certamen Starter Kit. So, would you be willing to talk about those two things and like how those came about?
Yeah. Um, so I did serve on a panel at the ACL Institute. That was led by David Jackson, formerly of Florida, now of Indiana. And he, I was glad, thankful that he brought me along for that. It was such an eye-opening experience because for so long I had, my goal had been to kind of help Massachusetts, win a championship at nationals. And then being able to kind of step back from that and see that, hey, there are a lot of other programs who would love to be able to accomplish either that or even just to have a little bit more success, to be able to score in certain more difficult rounds or to be able to spread Kurtamen throughout their state. Really inspired me to find a way to contribute to that effort. So I went back to the drawing board and went through the resources that I had, tried to create some new things as well, and then created the Certamen Starter Kit, which I think has been a really successful and useful tool for the folks that I've heard from.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a really good tool, and I think it's a fantastic introduction to the subjects. I mean, there needs to be like a watered down version that gives you an idea and gives you kind of like baselines and process like a progress kind of a report of sorts for you to like figure out how you're doing and where you're going. And you updated it recently as of maybe like a few weeks, like 2 weeks ago maybe, or maybe less than a week ago. Would you be willing to talk about what the updated version is seeing, like kind of what you have added or potentially changed from the past one?
Yeah. So I think the most significant feature is really an addition by subtraction. I took out a few of the more bullet pointed outlines just because they were great for easy access to look at, but some of the information I thought was a little bit more obscure than someone just starting out would want to be focusing in on. So I kind of retooled it around some of the more comprehensive outlines that were already there. And then in doing so, I was able, over the past couple of years, a big project of mine has been to create study questions specifically for each of those longer outlines. So those are all complete now, and they're linked in the starter kit. So now, if you're studying from the literature outline there, that I think it's what 12 pages of an outline, but there are something like 1,000 study questions that you can go through, and they're organized, by page number. And that was really a successful model for me starting to study mythology and things. So I wanted to be able to provide that for other students to emulate.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that sort of like, oh, you finished whatever it may be, a packet, a source book, whatever, and it's like, here's a set of questions to kind of test yourself on it, and you get a good gauge of like where you are and what you've maybe retained. Maybe it's been too long. No, so I think that's super cool.
And I
Yeah, I
think,
think, oh, go ahead, good.
oh, no, I was just going to say that, like, I know a lot more students are using like digital flashcard resources, which are really helpful. So for those, because they're in Excel format already, if you want to put them into your Quizlet or Anki or whatever you're using, it's very easy to do that. Now you can actually have everything at your fingertips. You can either run through it yourself at game speed, or you can have somebody else quizzing you, and you've always got fresh questions there that you can practice. And I always say do it at game speed so that you're used to that in competition.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's really good to hear that they're in it like a spreadsheet form, because that's always the thing, right? Is how easily can you convert it once you have it into whatever is your study mode. So, yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, I hope more and more people use it. I need to get it kind of like furthered along to some people I talk to, so I hope that they use it as an introduction at their schools and stuff because I think it's a good starting place. It's a good introduction. Um, so I feel like that Certamen Starter Kit really kind of captures your understanding of the game and how you've seen it for so long, right? And I just want to know like what your thoughts are on the current scene. Like you know, you've worked through this, you've determined this is kind of your this is the introductory level to get introduced to it. Obviously, that's been changing over time, right? Like it's really been scaling what a novice needs to know since the game's kind of started. So, what are your thoughts on like the scene? Are there things you want to keep and potentially things that you think got removed that you want back? It's a lot. It's a lot. So, take your time and how you want to parse it.
I mean, I still love the Kurtaman scene for what it is right now. I think, people have done a lot of really interesting, unique things with it. Um, and the great thing about it is there's so many, you think, okay, it's a game where, someone asks questions and you answer them, but there are still so many unique styles to asking questions, writing questions. Um, and so it makes coaching for me interesting because one tournament, you may have, one style, it might be, closer to, I think, kind of the quiz bowl style that's been really popular lately. And so we get to kind of work on preparing for that. And then you might get another tournament that's more of the traditional, shorter questions, buzzer race type questions. And, it's a whole different skill set and it, allows us to prepare for that. So I love that, you're always being pulled in these different directions. So you can never, get too comfortable or too complacent. You always have to, be able to adjust and adapt on the fly.
Yeah, and are there anything that you or any things where you think like, they got removed, they're kind of getting phased out in the overall scene that you may want back? You think like, this is kind of the thing that's just kind of it's kind of unfortunate it kind of got removed.
I don't know. I mean, like there are certain, I guess there are certain types of questions that, and you see this in the Common Starter Kit some that, it's very reminiscent of, a few years ago where you might have more questions that would start off with like the year of a battle or the birthplace of an author. Um, and those things do still come up, but now they're, question writers being a little bit more creative and, maybe layering the information in a way where it's, not the first clue. And so, I do miss, that element, being able to have that speed and something that you can kind of latch onto, especially if you're just getting going with it. But I also appreciate, it being there, but being a little bit more subtle. So yeah, I mean, there's nothing missing, I think. I just enjoy seeing the way the game develops.
And are there any things you've kind of like come across that you would like to maybe see like included more in the game in the future? Whether it be like though maybe a controversial topic to some, asking more like civ questions in Latin or potentially doing something like that. Are there things like that that you'd like to see more in the game?
Um, yeah, I think I mean, perhaps I would like to see the the Roman life and culture be kind of a bigger portion of the game. And again, this may be, somewhat of a selfish view on the matter, but I know that, for instance, Massachusetts, we have a lot of students that study just the culture things because that interests them. Whereas traditionally, it gets lumped in as part of history. You kind of have to do both side by side. But we end up having players that, are great language players that decide to study culture, or that, we've had teams where we have a designated culture specialist who, in some rounds may have one dedicated question and in other rounds may not have any. So I've always been a proponent of possibly maybe reducing one language question and make that designated as a culture. Um, I mean, I understand the pros and cons to that, but that's really the one thing that I would love to see. Otherwise, I mean, I'm somewhat neutral on the asking Civ questions in Latin. I think that at NJCL this year they did a really great job of kind of working that through different categories. It seemed like they would ask a myth question in Latin that actually would count as a grammar question sometimes, but then other times it might count as a myth question. So I thought that was really really cool.
Yeah, yeah, I did like the way they implemented it this year, and I thought there was a question maybe on like Chrysaeus, I think, that I thought was asked like fantastically. I thought the structure created like very cool buzz points. So yeah, I hope to see more of them, but potentially in more like, they're kind of testing Lang, but that's a whole different conversation. Um yeah, and I mean, those are all like really interesting things you bring up because I mean, I played during most of the time when it was still on the shorter end of questions. I only started writing once it really became more the pyramidal, the longer quiz bowl style questions. So I definitely see there's both sides of them. And I like the short questions sometimes. They're fun to just have the quick buzzer race experience of it. Um, and yeah, I think with that, like kind of just looking on the scene as a whole, um, I'm just curious if you have any like specific words of advice and stuff you'd like to share with people, other coaches and students who are getting into the game or have been and are trying to find like a new idea or path, like anything you'd like to share.
Yeah, I can say a couple things to that. I guess I would start with a word of advice to coaches who are looking to kind of build up their programs. Um, a lot of people go into it saying they don't, they haven't done Kurtama before, they don't know how to approach something like this. But I mean, we have a lot of wonderful, talented Latin teachers and classics teachers in our field, and whatever you're doing for your students in class, you're giving them everything that they need in class. And so, Kurtamen is kind of a similar approach. I mean, you know, there are, like I said, the Certamen Starter Kit and other things out there, other resources are great tools to help, just, additional resources to help further what you're already doing. How to assess your students. It's just considered another assessment. And then just, have fun and make sure that they're having fun doing it. And then more generally to players and coaches, I think, it's it's a process. And so I know that in Massachusetts, I've tried to be really encouraging. We always have, as a coach of Boston Latin schools, always produce some pretty solid teams. I overheard after leaving around, oh, it's Boston Latin, can't beat them or whatever. But be kind to yourself as you're going through the process. It takes a while. You're not gonna do this overnight. But you can pick little things and be proud of those successes along the way. Maybe your goal is you want to be able to score in a derivative on the derivative question in a round against a difficult opponent, and then you finally get that. It doesn't matter what the end score of the round is; you accomplished your goal. So be proud of that, and then let that fuel you. Because at the end of the day, it's all about just instilling that passion for learning. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly like it. I think, it's just set goals for yourself that you want to achieve. And as you make them and keep going along the process and keep increasing them, I think that's the process. It's like a self-guiding kind of thing. So yeah, thank you so much for those words of advice. I think they would be very much appreciated. And I think it'll help a lot of people because it's a hard mind frame to get into, right? Everyone wants to just automatically win. And it's like, it doesn't matter what else happens, right? It's just score the most points. But I think it's a really important perspective to have on the game. And I think it maybe hopefully takes a little away from the hyper competitiveness it's seen in recent years.
Yeah, I mean, one other thing though is that a lot of times, the students that gravitate towards Kurtamen are used to being the strongest students in their class, getting their A's and everything, and then you get to Kurtamen and you're against other students who are doing the same thing at their school, but who've also prepared a lot for this game. So it can be kind of a frustrating, uncomfortable experience at first, but you have to be open to the growth, and if you enjoy it, I think you'll be willing to go through the process of getting there. And once you do get there, it'll be so worthwhile. You know, one of the things that I'm most proud of ever accomplishing was, studying mythology my senior year and going from, not having played, like probably placing like 30th out of like 35 people on my level in the mythology test at nationals the previous year to high scoring it a year later. But it was a process. Every day I was grinding, and I would have a setback, and back to the drawing board and just kept plugging away. And when I finally accomplished that, I I was so proud. I learned how to study effectively. I had a thing that I could hold on to as a signal, as a symbol of that for the rest of my life.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it is a process. And I think everyone needs to remember that when they're working through it. And everyone's working through it, right? Everyone's working super hard. Uh, so yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. I think there's a lot that I learned individually, and I hope a lot of people also got a lot out of. And yeah, thanks so much for your time, Michael.
All right, thank you for having me, Gil.
Yeah, all right. Take care.